China, 1900. A 2,000-year-old empire rich in natural resources comes into conflict with four budding European superpowers eager for profit.
A tragedy of the biggest proportion.
Resentful, mysterious, powerful, a secretive sect emerges. Martial artists with apparently supernatural powers. For 55 days, the Boxers will hold the Western world to ransom as 1,000 besieged Europeans fight for their lives. Told in the words of the hostages and with the official records of the Chinese court, tonight, Time Watch reveals how mutual misunderstandings span out of control, creating the crisis that shaped modern China, the Boxer Rebellion. The story of the siege begins where it will end, in the Forbidden City in Beijing, the world's largest imperial palace. The Chinese consider this place the center of the world. At its heart, the emperor. In traditional Chinese philosophy, he's considered to be almighty and beyond reproach. He is the link between mankind and the heavens, at least in theory. In reality, everything depends on how an emperor exercises his powers. In the late 1890s, the young emperor Guangzhou is still trying to make his mark. From the Great Wall in the north, Guangzhou's empire stretches for thousands of miles across the Asian continent. His 400 million subjects are naturally protected by jungles and mountains in the west and south. In the east, the ocean provides a formidable barrier to any foreign invaders. But since the early 19th century, European warships have been threatening the Chinese empire. Chinese arms are no match for the industrializing Europeans. During the Opium War of 1860, Britain and France dealt China a crushing defeat. China was forced to open up its markets to the Europeans. Along the coast, the Europeans set up trading posts. They create special spheres of influence as their international rivalry grows. The French and British in the south, the Japanese and Russians in the north. Shanghai, today one of the largest and most vibrant cities in the world. After the Opium Wars, the city becomes the center of China's foreign trade. The Europeans run their operations from these buildings. They have their own jurisdiction, masters in a foreign land.
You have scholars, journalists, bankers, engineers, adventurers.
In rural China, there's concern that the Europeans are upsetting the country's feng shui, the world's natural balance. In the villages, resistance against the foreign devils is growing. They call themselves fist fighters for righteous harmony. The Europeans just call them boxers, secret societies of angry young men in the countryside, martial arts experts who vow to throw the Europeans back into the sea. Claiming to possess magical powers, the boxers have great popular appeal. The Chinese court is in turmoil. After years of inaction and stagnation, a hugely ambitious reform program is underway. The young emperor Guangzhou wants to change the country's education and administration. He's inspired by the reformers of the West.
维新之事为何进展如此缓慢？朕要你即刻出办。
Guangzhou's uncle, the ultra-conservative Prince Duan, regards the young emperor as a Western stooge. He is secretly plotting to stop him.
你都要抓紧去办。
Behind the scenes, the young emperor's aunt, the powerful Dowager Empress Cixi, is keeping a close eye on the developments. It was she who put the emperor on the throne when he was a child. She may step in if the reforms spin out of control. The heavy-handed behavior of the Germans makes things worse for the pro-Western emperor. In 1898, the German military sends a punitive expedition into Chinese territory. Dozens of people are killed. In this village, hundreds of houses are destroyed. It's next to a railway line that was financed by German investors. After it was sabotaged, the Germans had wanted to teach the locals a lesson. The German massacre plays directly into the hands of the Boxers. Across the Shandong Peninsula, new recruits exercise in village squares. Boxer leaders play on the superstition of the peasants. Firing blanks, they claim to be invincible to bullets. Young women, known as Red Lanterns, are recruited. They become an integral part of the Boxers' theatrical displays. It's the beginning of a cycle of misunderstandings that will soon turn China upside down. At the court, there have been some fundamental changes. The pro-Western young emperor is still on the throne but has been stripped of his powers. His radical reforms have been stopped by the conservative courtiers. Instead, his aunt, the powerful Dowager Empress Cixi, runs the government from behind a silk screen. The Empress and the conservatives regard the Boxers as a minor issue. They suspect a European plot aimed at restoring the young emperor's powers. It's a fundamental misunderstanding which is at the heart of the crisis that is about to unfold.
要重入捉拿凶犯，以平洋人之路。
尔等有何高见呢？
The moderates want to negotiate with the militarily superior Europeans.
以和为妥。
But hardline Prince Duan calls the moderates cowards. He is spoiling for a fight with the foreigners.
你乃是鼠目寸光。
你真是胆小如鼠。成何体统？
The last meeting actually decided to declare war on the foreigners.
Most ambassadors want to comply with the court's demands and evacuate Beijing. The German minister, Baron von Kettler, disagrees. He doesn't trust the Chinese assurances. Von Kettler believes that if they leave the relative safety of the legations, they will all be murdered on the way to the coast. The ambassador decides to pay a visit to the Chinese Foreign Ministry. He takes a cigar and a book in case he's kept waiting. He also carries a revolver. For China is at war with the West, and the imperial troops in Beijing are nervous. Everyone expects a siege. Nobody knows how long it will last. It may be called the Boxer War, yet the bulk of the siege troops are imperial soldiers loyal to the Empress. Boxers only serve as auxiliaries. They face 400 well-trained European Marines from 8 nations. The British contingent, under the command of Captain Strauts, is the largest with more than 130 soldiers. If they don't leave Beijing by the 4 p.m. deadline, the Europeans know they will be trapped. Each soldier has only a few hundred rounds of ammunition. By comparison, Chinese supplies appear unlimited. The ultimatum is public knowledge. When it is ignored by the Europeans, the Empress has no choice. She orders her troops to start firing. At 4 p.m., the siege of the legations begins. All communication with the outside world has been cut. The defenders are on their own. Though facing a united enemy, the diplomatic quarter is defended along national lines. British, Russian, and American troops are deployed near their embassies in the west. German, Japanese, and French troops are in the east. If the Chinese launch a decisive attack, the diplomatic quarter will become impossible to defend. Isolated from the outside world, the question on everyone's mind is if and when the Empress will order an all-out assault.
We gather that there must be at least 3,000 or 4,000 soldiers attacking us, and I fancy their ammunition is inexhaustible. If they manage to break our walls, we should have to put all the women in the cellars of the chief's house and hold what part of the place we could.
Even without a direct assault, the Europeans are taking heavy casualties.
The Germans have suffered dreadfully and killed and wounded. Our casualties are now 80, and we had not a man to spare to begin with.
Emma Martin now works in the makeshift siege hospital. Though a qualified doctor, she has the duties of a nurse, as women doctors are not allowed to treat war wounds.
First, a Marine was brought in. Later, one of our boys came in, shot through the head. He died that very minute. Today, I felt like crying, but there was no time.
Two weeks into the siege, there is still no sign of a European relief army. After capturing the Dagu forts, the troops from the international fleet are bogged down in the city of Tianjin. It's the last major obstacle on the way to the capital. There are pitched battles with Boxers and Imperial troops. The outcome will determine the fate of the besieged Europeans in Beijing. In the Forbidden City, within earshot of the siege, the court is getting fractious. The war against the Europeans is not going well. Hardline General Dong Fuqiang wants to wipe out the diplomats in Beijing. For now, the Empress refuses an all-out assault. The diplomats are worth more as hostages, a possible bargaining chip with the European governments. But the pressure on the diplomatic quarter continues unabated. Every day, there are more casualties. Nearly a third of the troops in the 4th week of fighting. Civilian volunteers like Morrison have joined the front line. Every man is needed. The fighting often spills over into these alleyways next to the diplomatic quarter. It's the 16th of July, 1900, day 26 of the siege. Today, the fighting is more intense than ever.
The darkest day of all the siege. They carried in George Morrison with a flesh wound to the leg. And almost at the same time, Captain Strauss with a shattered thigh. He's the best officer we have.
X-rays have been invented, but none are available in Beijing. Instead, the doctor relies on more traditional methods of treating flesh wounds. The fastest way to find a bullet is with his fingers. Morrison survives, but Captain Strauss is less lucky. A bullet has hit one of his arteries.
The end is clearly in sight. If our losses continue at the same rate, then by the end of July there'll be nobody left to defend us, but women and children, and 120 grievously wounded men.
The same day, an important message reaches the Forbidden City. Tianjin has fallen. European, American, and Japanese soldiers are taking terrible revenge. They are looting the city and are executing their prisoners. It's the Dowager Empress's worst nightmare. An Imperial messenger appears at Captain Strauss' funeral, just as the defenders are giving up hope. The court asks MacDonald for a truce.
They'd besieged us for a month, yet from the moment they were displaying every sign of friendship. It was even said that the Japanese bought rifles from the Chinese soldiers for $15 apiece. An incredible story, anywhere but in China.
A brief truce, but the siege continues. In early August, 14,000 international troops depart for Beijing, but fierce resistance slows down their progress. In Beijing, Imperial commanders are losing control of their troops. On the 13th of August, determined Boxers and rogue units of Imperial soldiers prepare the final assault, so dreaded by the Europeans. In a final push, they want to wipe out the legations before the relief army arrives.
With the battle cry, "Shah, Shah, kill, kill," the soldiers and Boxers attacked us. The firing intensified threefold.
But the attack lacks the punch it needs to break through. The next day, the International Relief Army reaches the capital. The troops take terrible revenge. Beijing is sacked and looted. Anyone suspected of being a Boxer is executed. The Empress and the court flee the Forbidden City. China, which prides itself in the moral superiority of its leaders, has to take the blame for causing the war. Now, almost forgotten in the West, for Professor Jiang, the Boxer Rebellion continues to shape China's history today.
Well, the Boxer War is the reason for the 20th century where the Chinese try to rebuild themselves.